Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Fish Friday number 247 and we have a good one for you today. Today's fish is a fish I cannot believe we haven't talked about yet in the history of this channel. It honestly blows my mind, and in fact we've only really talked about one fish similar to this, and it's just, I'm very sorry that we haven't talked about this fish. This is a truly interesting fish. You obviously know about it from the title of this video, but today's fish that we're going to be talking about is the longnose gar. Now the longnose gar, or scientific name Lepizosteus osseus, again that's Lepizosteus osseus, it is part of the family Lepizosteidae, which is the family of gars. Now the longnose gar is native to eastern United States, Central America. I do have a range map right here, so you can see really concentrated around the Mississippi River Basin, but it does go into the Rio Grande Basin and situations like that. And then it does get down into northern Mexico, and I believe down to Cuba as well. But it's very, very well known to be in the North America. Now, this fish is found in freshwater water bodies, and I do want to say water bodies because they have been found in ponds and lakes and streams and larger rivers. Essentially, they can be found and survive anywhere there's water. Now, they do like to be in waters with downed trees, a lot of stone outcrops, a lot of ample vegetation. And there's reasons for that we'll get into later. Now this can be considered a larger fish. They average around 70 to 120 centimeters, which is 28 to 48 inches. And they have a maximum length of around 1.8 meters, which is around 6 feet in length. And they can weigh up to 25 kilograms, which is around 55 pounds. Now, I have caught a lot of longnose gar, and I have to say, if I ever found a 6-foot longnose gar, especially a 55-pound one, I would be absolutely shocked. Now, in terms of gars, it does have that sort of traditional gar shape, so very cylindrical body, very torpedo shaped. It's not as thicker bodied as some of the other gars, especially the alligator gar, but it's very cylindrically shaped, and it has this olive green coloration on the body with this lighter belly on the ventral side. And depending on the clarity of the water, how clear the water is, will actually determine how green this fish gets, how olive green it is. The clearer the water, the more green it is, and then the more murky the water, the actual browner it is. And this helps it with camouflage. And we'll get into why this fish needs to be camouflaged in a little bit. And it has this very long, thin snout, which is where it got its name, the longnose gar. It doesn't have any spots on the head. It can have some spots on the body, but it's really concentrated on having spots on the caudal fin, so the back fin. Speaking of the caudal fin, if you notice right here, it does actually have a heterocircle tail, which is pretty indicative of it being a primitive fish. And this fish is considered a primitive fish. It's got the characteristics of sort of the fossil record. The heterocircle tail, the very thick ganoid scales, which is why this fish is a very almost bony. It's almost an armored fish. And the dorsal fin and the anal fin are set very far back on the body. They usually have spots as well, especially when they're young. When they're young, they will have this very heavily spotted area, and to me, when they're younger, especially when they're inbreeding, they'll develop very yellowish orange fins, which is why I actually consider the longnose gar to be the most beautiful of the gar species. It usually has the most coloration, but a lot of times you just kind of see them in this sort of drabber colors on the body, but their fins will still have that deal. Now their snout does have, it is really thin, and it's actually one of the ways to identify them is that it's a longer snout where the width of the snout right behind the nostrils is smaller than the pupil of the eye, or at least the same width of the eye. And that's actually very, very good because it's most often confused with the alligator gar. A lot of people say, ooh, I saw alligator gar down by the rivers or the stream, especially where I'm from in the hill country of Texas. And I can almost guarantee you, you did not see an alligator gar. You saw the longnose gar, which is probably the most common gar species in the hill country of Texas, or you saw the spotted gar, which is on par. Might even be more common, but in my experience, it's the longnose gar that is actually more common. But the easiest way to tell if you have the fish in your hand, if you're very careful, you can open up their mouth, and alligator gar will have 2 rows of teeth, whereas the longnose gar, the spotted gar, and the Cuban gar, which are the only other gar species, actually only have 1 row of teeth. And that's the most, that's the best example, the best way to tell them apart. Once you get an eye for them and you see a lot of them, you can tell the differences pretty easily. Now, the longnose gar is a very long-lived species. They can live around 15 to 20 years with a maximum lifespan of around 39. Sorry about that. So they are long-lived. They do not live as long as other people might think, and they primarily eat small fish and crustaceans. And one of the reasons why they like being around with those stone outcrops and heavy vegetated areas is because with their dorsal fin and anal fin set far back, they're actually more of an ambush predator. But even though they are ambush predators, they are not really going after bigger game fish that people think they do. They primarily eat these small fish, and part of the reason for that is their snout is actually so delicate and can be so easily broken. And in one population, 84% of the prey that this one population ate was actually just inland silversides, which is a very, very small fish. A lot of people think that gar will kill all the game fish in a reservoir. That is not the case. One interesting fact about the gar, all gar species, is they are obligatory air breathers. They have this highly vascularized swim bladder that acts as a lung that helps supplement gill respiration for breathing both air and water. A lot of people in the past used to think that they just breathe air as a supplement, but in fact they actually do need to be there. Give me 1 second. Sorry about this. Don't know how to pause. Well, we can finish that. Now, some states do have them as threatened, and the reason for that is actually because of overfishing. People consider this a trash fish, so a lot of people in the past have gone through great lengths trying to remove all gar from bodies of water, which has, caused a lot of issues. But on top of that, one of the reasons why they have declining populations is actually leads to the interesting fact we're going to end the video on. It actually has to do with their reproduction. They actually require and use floods and flooded vegetation to reproduce. The longnose gar, not so much as alligator gar, but they still use those floods as sort of a trigger for reproduction to happen. And the reason why that's important is because with all the dams and everything that we have put into river systems across the United States and across the world, that actually controls flooding, which is good from a human standpoint, but is actually disastrous from an ecological standpoint. Thousands of fish species across the world use floods as they're a very important part of their life cycle, whether it's for reproduction, feeding, or migration patterns and situations like that. So as we reduce the amount of floods that have come through, it has actually caused a huge blow to all gar species' reproductive habits. And what's even more than that is the young of both alligator gar, longnose gar, spotted gar really depend on flooded areas for their to hide. And the reason for that is because baby gar just essentially float in the water, and they'll eat tiny crustaceans, but they spend a lot of their time just floating in the water, especially on top of the water. They look exactly like small sticks floating around, which is flood debris. And when I say small sticks, I'm talking about like 2-3 inches. Not talking about your juvenile gar that are this big. By then, they're basically young adults. I'm talking about true larval gar that are this big. They're floating in that flooded debris. Well, if you do not have any of that flood debris, it makes it much easier for predators to catch and eat those young gar. And when you talk about a species that is very long lived and takes long to sexually mature, I believe around 6 years, it can cause a huge blow to the population. So really right now, the current world is almost a perfect storm to really harm gar species. And it's one of the reasons why so much effort and research is going into alligator gar, longnose gar, and spotted gar, and a lot of education to show people, hey, these are not trash fish species, and they are not harming the game fish populations to the extent that many people think. And I want to emphasize that. Oh, I got a very mad baby in the other room. But you know, please be aware they are not a trash fish. They are a beautiful fish. I do want to end the video on, they can be bought in the aquarium trade. Do not do it. That's just bad. Everything about that is bad, and they're not that expensive, but do not get them. That's bad. Very bad. But thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you do. I'd really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. If you'd like to support the channel, please click the link down below. It is by no means expected, but very much appreciated regardless. Take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and peace.